young adult therapy. I specialize in adolescents, teenagers, and then parent-child relationships. So I see a wide variety of family units and family dynamics. And this is something that I get asked by parents very often because it is a very primary and unique concern and reality for this generation. So I feel really grateful to be here speaking on it, and since there's just not very many of us, we'll hopefully just be able to have a really great discussion, and if y'all have questions as we go, you're welcome to raise your hand. If we answer it, I'll let you know we're answering it, and if not, we can definitely create a discussion around that too. So just to start, who has elementary school kids that are here? Anyone? Middle school? Middle school, high school?
Middle school.
Middle school is my bread and butter. I love it so much. I know nobody says that, but I love it. I used to teach middle school. I'm back to get my clinical social work degree and now do teenagers in a different way. So I was just telling Whitney, I love partnering with schools. So this is my happy place to be doing both. So I geared this really towards adolescents and teens. So I just wanted to double check to make sure that I got the right info, but it works for a wide variety. But our objective today, we're going to examine the developmental needs and norms of this generation. Why is it happening? What's happening in their brain? What makes this a little bit more of a concern? Understand the implications of how we are messaging media use and technology use. Identify individual children's digital readiness, because it is not just one age. It's different for every kid based on their particular needs and personalities. Explore appropriate autonomy versus parental control. Spoiler alert, having too much parental control backfires in the other direction. Having too much autonomy backfires in the other direction, which is why you're here, is to figure out how the heck we balance all this. Evaluate personal media usage and its effect on children. So we'll be challenging some of our adult tendencies a little bit and how that is really rubbing off onto our family dynamics and the behaviors that we're seeing. And then we're going to really learn how to proactively collaborate with your children as a family unit with boundaries and rules and expectations around this media consumption and technology. So every time a parent comes in, especially with teens, they always tell me, if I could just take that thing out of their hands, everything would be fine. And the thing that I hear kids say, if my parents would stop lecturing me about these things in my hands and just listened, everything would be fine. So we see a really big power struggle that occurs here. Does anybody have this situation happen at home? Yes, stop lecturing me, or I've heard this a million times, or, well, you're just not listening. And if you were to listen, we would be having the same conversation. So this is a common power struggle because it is the reality of where we're at. And it's also the reality of this age. This age's job, this 13, 12 to 17-year-olds, their job is to push boundaries, and their job is to figure out what they can, what their autonomy looks like and what it doesn't look like. And so they're in this exploratory mode. So unfortunately, when they're bugging you, they're probably doing their developmental job. But we want to really take away the power struggle of the media use because it's going to be prevalent. So the phrase that I love to use is water the flowers, not the weeds. Whatever we're putting energy into and whatever we're reinforcing is really what we're going to see. So I want you to think about that with little children. When you see them, let's say that they are not doing anything that's very harmful, but maybe they're sucking their thumb or something. And the more we tell them to stop sucking their thumb, the more attention they're getting for that, thus they will keep doing it. We just kind of ignore it because it's not a super harmful behavior, then it will most likely dwindle because they're not getting that reinforcement. So the same thing happens, especially with our teens, because they are so smart at calling out the BS. So by reinforcing the things that you want to see, the more they are going to do that, because at the very most, they want your attention, and they want your intentional attention, and they want to get attention for the good things. But if they're going to get attention for the bad things, it's still attention. So we really want to learn how to water what we want to see. So the more negatively we talk about media use, the more negative that cloud becomes in your family system. The more we try to control it and really try to bring scarcity to it, the more obsessive it becomes. So we're going to talk about switching that messaging upside down and how infusing positivity as a tool will be more successful for you in the conversations. Tech is not going anywhere. And what we're going to kind of do to help it work for us instead of against us is we're going to create that appropriate messaging. And then the best thing, if there's one takeaway that you get at the end of this, my hope is this, that the more that you can collaborate with your kid instead of sitting on opposite sides of the table, if you're sitting on the same side of the table looking at the problem versus sitting on opposite sides of the table with the problem in the middle, you're going to have so much more success at connecting with them, communicating more effectively, and actually getting somewhere. It'll be getting you what you want and then what they want. So first, let's understand the brain a little bit. I'm not going to go too much into this because I think, we all have a lot of resources around this, but a typical adolescent is incredibly impulsive. They have no inhibitions. They are, they can't think about long-term. So this is when we, can see a lot of suicidality because they're not really thinking about the longest term of consequences, right? So this idea that the recklessness is a part of their developmental journey, that their brain doesn't have the executive functioning skills that we have as adults. So when you say, I keep telling you over and over again, if you only listen, they might need to hear that a few times because we have to teach them very explicitly because it isn't an implicit behavior. And they also don't have the skills to pull themselves away from the media. So because they are getting reinforced by the media, they're getting likes or they're getting some sort of dopamine rush or they're getting some sort of reinforcement that's positive, our brain wants to keep going at it, which is why we as adults go on too, because it is we feel good when we're doing it and we get that hit, right? So because we're seeking after that dopamine and because the kids don't have executive functioning skills, they're going to keep going back at that because why wouldn't you, right? It feels better to do that. So they need to be explicitly taught how to do so, and just expecting that they're going to do it on their own is just not an appropriate expectation. And I want you to also think about that in most of the things with this age, right? Of just expecting them to know how is not an appropriate expectation. We have to teach our kids what we want them to see or what we want them to do. And they also learn so much by seeing what we do. So how we model these kinds of behaviors is really important as well. Another thing that is hard for, I think, generation, I have a couple of kids, so I'm going to wrap myself in on this, even though I might be a little bit younger, but this is their peer lifeline. And I think that this is why parents want to take it out of their hands. They're like, go talk in person, or this is not how we did it when I was your age, like go do, and I'm there with you. We're going to talk about that balance. But the reality is this is their lifeline. This is how their generation connects. It is how they get information. It is how all of my clients are like, yeah, I stay up, I FaceTime my friends. So they're not always scrolling, but this is their communication tool. This is their tool to connect with people. So can it be used as a way of disconnection? 100% yes, it can. But I want you to put yourself in that mindset of when the phone gets taken away, it really does feel like for them that their whole connection to their peers is taken away. So it's appropriate to do so at times. Consequences are consequences, and we'll talk about that too. But I think when they say, well, this is just how I talk to my friends, that just is actually true, that it is their lifeline. It is kind of that that unique generational connection and reality. So that's just, I think it's a hard pill to swallow, but it's there, you know what I mean? One of the other things that we see a really big increase in is anxiety. How many of your kids or your kids' friends or kids that you know in your neighborhood are dealing with just anxious feelings in general, right? Some additional stress, maybe what seems like more anxious worries that maybe you didn't have worries when you were that age, but they're kind of worrying about some more adult things. Anxiety has increased so much. And one of the big reasons that is is because we are constantly getting information, right? So like for me, when I was younger and 9/11 happened, like I only knew about it if the TV was on, but I didn't know anything else about it, whether only if my parents talked to me about it, right? So now when kids wake up and they get on their phone, they have access to all sorts of information immediately, and they're not sure how to sift through that information, which also needs to be taught. But having this continual exposure to adult concerns or adult worries or adult situations in general with a teenage brain creates fear, and fear is anxiety. So if you think about it kind of in that way of they're being exposed to adult content all the time. Adult content not meaning like sexually explicit, adult content in just adult things, right? Things that you need a more developed brain to really understand. Because even you and I, right, like we can get triggered by things that we see that we didn't even want to see, and we have to kind of quickly process through that. But we've learned through time, through experience, and through just actual physiological development how to do that and how to do it in a healthy way. They don't even have the physiological development to do it. So when they're getting this information at them all the time, it just is creating so much fear. Like, I had someone tell me today, I don't want to grow up and I don't want to deal with what adults deal with. Everything just feels so scary, right? And that's a 12-year-old. So that's the reality of the phone, right? It's the pure lifeline, and it's also can be really create a lot of anxiety and fear. So being able to teach them how to ask questions, create a safe enough relationship with each other for them to feel safe enough to ask questions, and helping them learn how to set personal boundaries around it is that explicit learning of, it's not good enough to say, why are you anxious? But I see why you're anxious. I'm anxious when I see these things. Let's talk about how we can put some boundaries in there together. So I want you to think about your relationship with food or exercise or teaching your children about sexuality. We want them to have a healthy relationship with all of these things that are going to be a part of their life. This is another one of those things that it's going to be here. So we want to teach them how to incorporate it in a healthy way rather than not talk about it at all because it's like there's some shame put to it, or, I just wish that you would throw that thing away anyways, or however we want to get away from the discomfort of the situation. So we want to teach them how to integrate it in a balanced way rather than just, well, if we didn't have it, there would be no problems. So there's a couple of different things. So the wise and safe boundaries mentality versus the high value scarcity mentality. So we want to teach safety and have appropriate age appropriate boundaries when we are talking to our kids about this. And the message that we really want to give them is that this is a tool. This isn't inherently good or bad. This is something that you get to choose how to interact with, right? And we want to give them that autonomy of, instead of it acting upon you, you can really act with it as a tool. So when we set those boundaries, we're a lot more likely to have a healthier balance. But when we start putting scarcity into the mix, the phone becomes of a lot more value, and that's where obsession really starts to creep in. So I want you to think about a diet. When you tell yourself, I can't have any chocolate, all you end up thinking about is chocolate, or the next time that you can have chocolate, or you see chocolate on someone's fingers and you're like, can I lick that off for you? Whatever it might be, right? It starts to really, you become more obsessed with it. And so when there is scarcity that is a part of the language, it makes it thrive in the shadows. So when we throw it into a corner, it's like shame. Shame doesn't survive when there's light thrown on it, but it really thrives in a corner. That's that scarcity mentality. When we're not talking about it, when we say that it's bad, when they can never, be doing it right, all of that. If they feel like they don't really know the expectations and at any minute it can be taken away, or my mom hates this, so I can't let her see me doing this, then the obsession is going to grow and grow and grow. How many of you have seen that? Yes, some head nods. Not that you're doing this wrong, but I think we've all seen that the Our kids are more dishonest when they're afraid of a consequence in general, right? They start to become a little bit sneakier because they want to skirt the rules and still have the privilege, right? So when we take out the morality, when we use it as a tool rather than something that is inherently good or inherently bad, then we're a lot more likely to be able to achieve a balance. So these are some just quick phrases that I wanted to throw out there as opportunities for us to start reframing things in our mind, because for me, I have a 5-year-old and screens are becoming a little bit more part of our life, I would say. And because he's also entering into school where screens are also used. And so I find myself being like, I don't want it in my house at all, you know, and we're just gonna not do it. And then he ends up waking up in the middle of the night and like finding the Alexa and plugging it in, and Alexa knows how to turn the TV, and all of a sudden he's watching Bluey and you're like, how did you do this? So not, again, that scarcity mentality to obsession. So these are helpful things that have been helpful for me to say there's so much good that comes from it. And there's also breaks that we need, just like everything else in our life, right? That this idea of moderation also works for this. And this is why. When we use screens, our brains practice lots of different skills, including creativity and problem-solving skills. And there's a million games and whatever, and videos and all sorts of things that can help increase that, right? But also they keep us very, very busy. Our brains are turned on all the time, getting a lot of action, and that can be very exhausting. It can put you kind of into a sleep-like state, and you're just getting overstimulated, which is why when you take it away, the tantrums might start, or the, how could you do this to me, you're ruining my life, might start. So to have that idea of they can be really, really helpful and busy, but we also just need breaks from busy things. Not we need breaks, you need a break from Instagram, but we just need breaks from things that keep our minds stimulated all the time, right? So we're neutralizing it here. When we watch TV, the fun comes from things that others make. And when we play, it comes from things that we make. And we need both. And both are great and both are fun. And one is not better than the other. They just can both exist. So when we neutralize that, like you would, you know, insert another issue, food or something like that. When you neutralize it, it takes the pressure off a little bit. You can breathe and be like, okay, this is going to be a fine thing for my kid to get. They'll have a busy mind. They'll have some questions. They'll maybe learn something. And I'm going to tell them ahead of time, we're going to stop at this point because we need a break from busy things. And there might be a transition there, but it's this idea that both can exist at the same time. We just have to intentionally create it. And we have to be able to, when we're talking to our kids, create this kind of messaging in what we say and what we do. So when you are talking about, giving your kid a phone, or kind of switching up maybe the culture that you've created in your family and saying, this is not working, we need to redo it, or when somebody's going to get their first iPad or such. The best thing that you can do with your partner is know your rules. Okay, so we're going to go through a couple of them, and I'm just going to throw out some ideas around some of these that you may or may not have thought of, but and I'd love your feedback on maybe some additional rules that you've had that have been effective for you. But knowing your rules and expectations before you collaborate with your kid is imperative, because they, in order for them to be successful with media, they need to know what ground they're standing on. If we just throw it to them and say, be responsible, they have no idea what that looks like, right? So with passwords, it typically is recommended by experts that you know passwords as parents. We're going to talk about how to use or abuse that, but knowing your kids' passwords is appropriate in this younger middle school age, especially. They can earn more privacy as they grow up and as they continue to prove responsible, but knowing passwords is important. And for your kid to know that you know their passwords is important. Downloading things, what's appropriate for your family? Do they have access to your credit card? Is it on their, you know, Apple Pay? Can they download whatever they want? Do they need to check with you before they download something? Are they allowed to download anything that's free? Are they allowed to download anything that costs money? Where are your boundaries around downloading? That's, I think, something that is not our first thing that we're thinking about, but can come into play. So knowing that ahead of time with each other is important. Friending, do you friend people that you don't know? We're going to talk about how to talk about these things in particular, but friending people you don't know is an important thing to teach your kid, because we need to teach them what that looks like. How do you know if you know them? If you have 10 mutual friends, does that mean that you know them? So between you and your spouse, really deciding, do we need to check the people that you are friending? These are personal decisions that you can make, but another really good one to think about. Sexting. This has become a very important thing, especially with sex trafficking and with the online presence that it has. So one of the important things that we need to be teaching kids with media is what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. And when it comes to sexting, I'm not talking about specifically, you should talk about it with like their individual relationships with their boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, but I'm talking about helping them to understand what grooming looks like. Right? What does grooming look like from somebody? This goes back to, are you friending people that you know or don't know? That doesn't necessarily mean that grooming wouldn't be happening if you're with people, even people that you do know. Unfortunately, a lot of the time it ends up being someone that you do know, right? So we want to teach them, what do tricky people look like? Not what do strangers do? It's not about strangers, because most of the time it's not a stranger, right? What do tricky people look like? What does this look like in general? Right? Because it could be an uncle's nephew or whatever, right? So when it comes to sexting, we mostly want to be talking about, yes, what is within your own family values, but also what does grooming look like online? Looks like somebody may be asking for pictures of you. That doesn't seem like a really big deal, because kids are exchanging pictures all the time and their pictures are up for everybody. But when somebody individually who is particularly older than you or of a different gender than you, or maybe a stranger, is asking for pictures of you, that is a red flag, right? So we want to look for, what is grooming? How do we explicitly tell them about this? Cyberbullying, a couple of things with that. What does cyberbullying look like? That should be explicitly taught. Also, what do you do if you're not being bullied or being the bully, but you see it? What are our family values around that? Do we expect you to say something? Do we expect you not to say something? Right? So not just don't be a cyber bully. Yes, we should be talking about what that looks like in general. This is the way that we expect you to talk to people online. This is what respectful language looks like. This is what disrespectful language doesn't look like, right? That kind of goes back with swearing too. Is that a family rule of yours? What do you expect to see when you open up your kiddo's phone, right? So being explicit about that. If there is something we want you to show us, what is that something? And then lastly, driving. Do you feel comfortable with them? What is, it's illegal to text and drive, so we'll just throw that one out there, but do you expect it to be in their backpack when they're driving? Do you expect it to be next to them so that you can get a hold of them if they're driving? What does that look like? For what distance? So these are just a few broad categories, but I wanted to just have you think about them in a little bit of a different way. So that not only do you say, like, these are the things that we're going to do, we're going to check your downloading, and we're going to check that you're only friending these types of people, and we're going to, I expect you not to text and drive, or, cyberbullying is bad, but very specifically what you expect with each category, because your kid already knows that cyberbullying is bad. They've been told their whole life that bullying is bad, but what does it look like specifically on this platform, and what do we expect you to do about it? That's a different level of expectation and requirement that you may or may not want to think about. Because what ends up happening when we hand our kids phones and we're not specific, you are just freaking pissed all the time, because they're not doing what you want them to do, but they don't know what you want them to do other than, like, I'll let you know if I'm being bullied. Right? So when we leave it to aloof, it creates the power struggle. When we agree to the specifics and the expectations ahead of time, then we can hold consequences to it. But if we never tell them, it's really hard to pull a consequence through, right? Okay, so is my kid ready? The it depends is, again, going back to, it's not going to be the same for every kid. It's not going to be the same age. It's not going to be the same for each of your kids. So it really depends on, are they socially aware, are they trustworthy, and are they responsible? So these are some questions to just ask yourself. Has my kid been caught lying recently? Have they been sneaky? If so, maybe not very trustworthy. They haven't hit that trustworthy piece yet. And we're not talking about perfect children, okay? We're talking about what has recent behavior looked like. Are they growing there? Has my kid been speaking inappropriately with their peers? Do you overhear them, talking about somebody and they're, being inappropriate in their behavior about talking about an adult or, someone of a different, gender or whatever it might be? You decide what that is. Does my kid keep track and take care of his things? We have lost 5 expensive water bottles and I will not be buying anymore. Why we got to 5, I don't know what I was thinking, but my kid knows if we're losing something, you are going to figure out how to earn it back, right? We're not just gonna he's like, well, you can just ask Alexa. I'm like, who do you think we are, kid? Okay. No, this is not how we're not going to run an entitled life. So what does that look like? Are they taking care of their stuff? If they have a car, do they take care of their car? If they just bought, if they just got something new for Christmas, are they taking care of it? Or are they already, they have no idea where it is? Do they understand social cues? This is a really big one. This is an emerging developmental space in general through adolescence, and especially for a lot of your middle school kiddos. But teaching them what those social cues are and kind of observing them when they're around their peers or when they're talking to people that aren't you is a really great way to understand. Why might understanding social cues be important for your kid in media readiness or in phone particularly?
Maybe break down social cues.
Okay.
And define that a little bit more.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. That was my question out there, is if anybody else had any idea of what the social cue that you might think would be important. Anyone? No, that's okay. Okay, so social cues can look like a lot of different things, especially, I think this goes back to also this responsibility with language. What does cyberbullying look like? What do we expect? How you interact with people in person? How do you interact with people online, right? So the social cues for a middle schooler might look like, how are they in their friend making abilities? Do they know how to strike up a conversation? Do they know how to set a verbal boundary with somebody if somebody's encroaching on some of their boundaries? So the social cues look different for every age, and those are going to be, you can look up a 13-year-old developmental ability or whatever, but it's really going to be within that of, am I comfortable enough with them in their peers in general to be able to take it to another platform, right? And then how do they talk about themselves? This one is, I think, very, very important. Not every kid is going to have most confidence in the world, but how they talk about themselves is going to be something to keep in mind when they do have increased media use as well, of seeing what direction are we really going in here. We know it used to really be body image for women, but that has, boys are whipped right back into that as well, because we are in such a digital age where everything is edited. I don't need to tell you guys about that, but how are they talking about themselves? Are they, do they have self-trust? Do they have a sense of self-worth? Are they standing on a foundation that seems strong enough to enter in, something that's a little bit trickier? So if your kid is not necessarily meeting these standards, but you need them to have a phone because they're your last kid at the middle school, or both parents work and you want to touch base to make sure that they got to their soccer practice, or somebody new is picking them up or whatever, it does not need to be the latest iPhone. So this is tricky because all of your friends' kids, your kids' friends, all of them have the latest iPhone in their brain, right? It's not true. Maybe it's close, but it's not true. So I like this idea of earning the smart part of the phone. That is part of that digital readiness, is you can communicate with your kid and have access to communication, to check on their safety, to when things switch up. All of that is totally appropriate. But when we're talking about particular media usage or social media usage, that does not have to come at the exact same time that you give them a phone when they're 11 or 10 years old, because they're the last one at elementary school. So these are a couple of, the Gab phone, the Pinwheel phone, the Trumi. There's a lot of different types of devices that you can get that offer all sorts of things, but some have, no internet access, some have very limited internet access. Some you can't download any apps, some you can. So all of them offer something different, but I would really, again, let the behavior be the guide. So if your kid continues to show responsibility, then you continue to give more privileges. If they don't, you don't. But starting from the bottom is a great place to start, because if you start at the top, you have nowhere to grow. Okay, so when they are ready, a couple of things that we want to be sitting down and talking with them about. That again, this is a tool where it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a tool that you can use for a lot to connect with your peers, to check your homework on Google Chrome. It's a tool that you get to use to better your life. It can also be a tool to not do that. But again, really coming in with that messaging of neutrality. This is a family privilege, not a right. One of the biggest tips I have is, and this is, everyone does this, I'm just gonna throw this out there, but this is not to take personal offense. When we give phones as a personal gift, it becomes their phone. So when you give it as a birthday gift or a Christmas gift, you have given it to them. And to you, you may be having different ideas about that. But when it is not a personal gift, and when it is, this is a privilege of our family, you have the privilege of doing this as you live within our family values and rules, then you have the access to the phone. Because they are not paying for it, or maybe they are, maybe that would be a part of the personal gift. But when we give it as a personal gift, then they can say, it's mine, right? So we don't think about that as parents, because we might not be thinking that far, but I think that that's a really good tip to remember when talking about entering into more digital use, is when you give an iPad as a gift, or when you give the next thing as the gift, that gift, you are giving it. And so it's harder to maybe have some stricter boundaries on that in your kid's brain, and all it's going to do is create more of a power struggle. So is it wrong to do it? Absolutely not. It may make your life a little bit harder. So thinking about it in this way when you are talking to your kid is, you have been so responsible. You have taken care of your new things. We see the way that you are, chatting with your friends. And we saw the other day that you really stepped in and helped somebody who really needed it. And we're just so impressed with you. We'd really love to give you the opportunity to use a phone. And this is a privilege of our family. And the more that you continue to live in our family values and rules, the greater opportunities you have with the phone. But it is a tool that you get to use. And you are welcome to earn more privileges with it. But when we talk about it as this is a family system, rather than here you go, but make sure you do this, and this, it's just a little bit trickier for that development.
Question.
Yes.
Are you going to cover it all on how to rein in the sense of entitlement with kids' use of phone, and how to give language to parents or empowerment to kind of help put in those extra checks and balances that maybe weren't there or were once but relaxed, but now they see they need them back?
Yeah.
And now it's a little harder to gain that control.
Yes, we are absolutely going to talk about that. That is kind of our crescendo, if you will. It's going to be the climax of the story, where we talk about how to create this type of system in your home specifically, and why collaborating with your kid is the best option, rather than just saying, well, it's out of my hands now, it's too late. We're going to talk about why it's not too late.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we think everybody's addicted to it. Studies show that it is. Okay, I heard this study the other day that I'm just now thinking of, I didn't put in the presentation, but it was so fascinating to me. So we were talking about, I was reading something about phones, and this expert was talking about how our phone habits are a lot like addiction habits, and that somebody who has meaning, we always go back for the dopamine hit, right? It's an easy thing for us to do, to have to feel good really quick, or to boost our confidence. It can also do the other thing, but it gives us a dopamine hit enough to keep wanting to go back. A great book about that is Dopamine Nation. It's fascinating, a very quick read. But it talks about how we're always going backward, and this is that is part of that addiction cycle, right? And then it goes on to say this, that we look as Americans, adults, we look at our phones on an average of 12 times an hour. And I want you to think about that in like alcohol or drug abuse. Imagine if it was like 12 pills an hour, or, 12 cases an hour, right? That would be very, very shocking. But when we hear it with our phone, it seems less shocking. But I just think that that's interesting data to kind of have that point of, if we're saying everyone's addicted to their phones, when you really think about what addiction looks like, we are trying to go back and getting this hit over and over and over again. And so imagine a developing brain who doesn't maybe see it that way, and who doesn't have the skills and ability to be able to recognize that part, that they're going back probably more than 12 times an hour. I was driving home a babysitter the other day who's babysitting our kids, and she's like 14 or 15 years old, and just in the car sitting talking with me just to her hands. She didn't, like, she was just nervous. She looked at her phone like probably 15 times just to tap it and like light it up to see if and she had gotten any notifications. And so that's in that literally a 6-minute drive, okay, like up the street. So that's not atypical, right? So when we think about 12 times an hour for us as adults, think about what that's like for an underdeveloped brain who's doing it more because it's their lifeline and they just need that reinforcement and that security and that connection. So we want to avoid the addiction, right? This is not a perfect process. Every kid is built differently. But in general, what the antidote to addiction is autonomy. And that sounds very scary for parents, because we want to think the more control we have over it, the better it's going to be. There is an appropriate amount of control, 100%. We're going to talk about that specifically. But this is about letting a little bit go of the control piece of that watering the weed. The more control I have over it, the better it's going to be. In fact, it gets more out of control, right? So autonomy, how much freedom can we give to our kid that is developmentally appropriate, that is appropriate based on what they're showing me that they are ready for, and that is within our family value system. So being able to balance a child's needs with the appropriate safety that a parent needs to just be able to check in with their kid. A couple of things. One, there is an appropriate balance to checking in. Moving a few slides ahead. What we want to do with our kids is not, I'm going to check every single hour all of your text messages and all of, everything that you've posted and all of your Snapchat. That may not be appropriate. That may be going in the too controlling of a way. But being able to say, hey, I have, as your mom and as this being the family phone, I'm going to check in on it time to time. And this is what I expect to see, right? So being able to trust that they're going to be within the family values that we're going to talk about as a part of your phone contract and media contract, trusting that is important. But the biggest piece to allowing your kid to have autonomy is your own personal self-regulation. Because a lot of the times we want to impose more control out of our own personal anxieties and fears, rather than even what the kid may be presenting as an individual, right? So is it appropriate to have, control, boundaries, expectations over, what your kids are doing? Absolutely, you are a parent, that is your job. It's 100% appropriate. The more we do, the more power struggles we are going to have. So again, that's going to look different from every kid. But this self-regulation piece is probably the biggest parenting work that I do with parents who I work with in the practice. A lot of the times the anxiety that they have about their kid is rubbing off so bad on the kid that there's this codependent relationship in the anxiety. So it's almost kind of like the parent tantruming a little bit. So one of the big pieces that I would really recommend is learning, not only have you talked about yourself, your values and your rules and expectations, which again, we're going to touch on, but being able to regulate your own fears, your own anxiety about things is absolutely imperative to your relationship with your kid in general, right? So it's really moving into this, I have an adult brain, I'm going to step into what I know is appropriate coping tools and mechanisms, and I'm going to self-regulate and calm myself down before I enter into this hot conversation with my kid. Because what happens when you're both coming in hot? Is it ever productive? Very rarely. I don't know when it's been productive for me. But when we're coming in hot, even if you're right, you're still coming in too hot, right? So the language could even be the same, but if you're hot and heavy and you're getting really heated, your kid's going to be feeding off of that, and they're going to assert that they're their own individual, and it's just the power struggle of the century. So when we're not regulating ourselves, it's harder to be able to have this collaborative process with your kid. Allow them to be responsible first by setting rules and expectations ahead of time versus I'm going to check your phone every single hour. Let them prove to you that they're responsible. Let them know that you trust them. That's why they're having the phone, is you trust them. Here are the rules and expectations, and I totally know that you got this. And I'm gonna be checking in on it from time to time. This is what I expect to see, but you have the privilege of being able to show me that you've got this. So always check in. That's your parental responsibility, right? Because this isn't their phone, it's the family tool, and it's their opportunity to use it. But you will let them know that you're checking in. But by setting expectations ahead of time, you're giving them the opportunity to really step into showing you that they're responsible. And that's going to help you not worry as much, but it's also going to allow them to one, step into that autonomy, but for you to also actually let go of the anxiety a little bit more. So here's when you know that your kid has really mastered it, which may not happen when they're in, middle school, but when they're capable of making safe and smart decisions. When you've checked in from time to time and you're seeing the things that you want to see, and you continue to see that they're speaking about themselves in a positive way, they're speaking towards others in a positive way, they're engaging in healthy coping mechanisms, that they're able to make smart and safe decisions online. They're not they're not friending people that they don't know from another country. And you don't see them hitting your credit card every other day on Amazon buying some whatever they wanted, right? So when they have mastered the balance of this, then you can maybe let go of the rein a little bit. Now, mastery is not, my kids see their phone as a harmful thing and my kids never on it, aren't they wonderful? Nor are they perfect at making the best decision in all circumstances, right? We're talking about a balance here. And this has to do with not only what they're doing on their phone, but right with tech in general, we want to be teaching this balance of what we talked about at the beginning of busyness with their brain and not busyness with their brain, right? And again, whenever you see them doing well, water it, water it, water it. The more they're going to be seeking reinforcement in some way. So if it's negative reinforcement, you got an F, you suck, how could you not have studied more for this? They're getting your attention. Attention is attention, right? But when you see them doing well and you are like, I saw that you really worked hard on studying. That was a huge moment. And you should be, I'm so proud of you. I hope that how do you feel about, having worked really hard? Or I saw that you came to me when you saw something questionable on your phone. I am so proud of you. And that is just showing me how smart you are with using this device. So when you are seeing these things done well, reinforce, 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 because what you reinforce is what's going to continue to happen. So this is the best meme ever, is how do you get your child to read a book? And then all you need to do is just kind of look and see what's happening. And I think with parents, a lot of the times we will tell our kids, do as I say, not as I do. And just our kids are so hardwired to follow exactly what we're doing, that what we model is what's going to happen. What we do is the snowball that keeps going. So we're not going to say this to put more pressure on you as a parent, because heaven knows we all need to give ourselves a lot more grace. But what we do with media speaks way more volumes than any rule or expectation that we can tell our kid and then us not follow it, right? So they are an absolute sponge. Again, teenagers especially are so good at calling out the BS. If they smell it, they are going to point it out and they are going to make sure you know it. So here are just some questions I'm going to read out loud, and I just want you to just quietly answer yourself. You can take a picture of this and do this with your partner another time, but Am I sometimes using the phone as a stress reliever instead of taking a walk or deep breaths or anything else that I know is going to help self-regulate? So I want you to think about the phone. Distraction is a great coping tool at times. There is a place for it in our world. Distraction, there's a place for it. It is not a long-term strategy that is a healthy coping tool that's really going to get you anywhere long-term, right? So being able to understand for yourself what you do when you need to self-regulate instead of just popping it open to get a dopamine hit, that's going to be a really important thing for us as adults to learn how to do if we want our kids to do it. So reflecting on, do I use it as a stress reliever? The answer for all of us is yes, we all use it as a stress reliever at times, but just pondering maybe, why do I do that? Having a little self-reflection maybe a little bit later. Do I use the smartphone as a way to withdraw from difficult interactions with my kids? Meaning, you got an email from a teacher that your kids didn't turn in their homework for the 13th time, and you are so freaking fed up with this. They get in your car, you have a really hot interaction, or you ignore them and you just scroll because you're like, I cannot get into this conversation again. Again, there's a place for self-regulation. Maybe you need the phone for a minute, calm yourself down, otherwise you're gonna yell at your kid, fine. But a lot of the times, like for myself, like when I'm with my in-laws, this is a great way that I, get away from some tricky family interactions. I'm like, and I'm not engaging with that. But we want to look at how often, what is our intention when we're doing these things, right? What aspects of phone screen time stress me out the most or trigger my insecurities? That's data points for us to say, what am I engaging in? What am I not engaging in? How does my phone use support the generous and social parts of me? What am I doing with my phone that is really beneficial for me? That is allowing me to connect with others? What types of relationships with devices am I modeling to my kids? Sometimes I have people that will say, my mom's on her phone all the time, and the mom's sitting in the, session, and she's saying, well, I have to check emails, and there's a place for checking emails, and sometimes that is needed, but the kid is also saying, I don't freaking care, you're on your phone. You can't be mad at me for being on my phone when you're on your phone. So again, there are adult reasons, but this idea of what am I modeling? Do I text and drive? Do I, pull it out at dinner time? Am I on it, for 3 hours a night while I'm sitting next to my kid and watching TV or whatever? Am I teaching them that it's okay? I already said that. So just some opportunities for you to reflect on as we continue to go into what our job is. We're gonna go through this. Does someone have the time? I don't have a water. 7:20? Yes. And we're going till 8. Okay. I was like, has it really been 20 minutes? I didn't prepare long enough. Okay. Your number one job is to value them. You already do this as a parent. None of this is to say that you are not doing it. My job and my hope is to never, ever place shame, blame on parents ever. We are all 100% always doing the very best that we can. When we get additional information, it allows us to maybe do a little bit more of our best when we have a little bit more information. So valuing them and your time with them is 100% key. Like we said at the beginning, when my kids come in and they say, like, my parent they lecture me. What happens when you lecture your kid about something when you're just talking at them? They plug their ears like this and they shut off, because that interaction to them might be, what meaning might they make out of a 6th lecture of the same thing when you go into lecture mode? Why do you think they plug their ears? They don't want to hear it? Yeah. Most of the time they're like my brother always says, Mom, I could have given you this lecture. Okay, I know this lecture. My mom is mad because she's like, then listen to it and don't make me do the lecture again. When that to them is this idea of my parent is just not seeing me. They're looking at the behavior, they're looking at the problem, but they're not seeing me. And sometimes we correlate our kids' behavior and their sense of value or worth, not consciously, but as the same thing. And it's really important for us. That's why it's so important for us to be self-regulated, is because when we're regulated, we can start to separate that out. We start to separate them from their behavior. So valuing them is different from the behavior. So that might look like this. The greatest word switch that I ever heard when I was in therapy working through some things is my therapist told me I needed to start replacing the but with the and, which would look like this. Honey, I love you, but you've got to clean up your room. We all know that when someone says, I'm sorry, but, well, does that make anybody else so freaking mad? Because whatever happened before the but is just totally negated and thrown out the window, right? You're like, I don't mean to offend you, but you're like, the but just, it comes with a condition, okay? So when we say, I love you, honey, but you've got to get better grades, you're associating your love with them with grades, right? So when we say, hey, let's talk about your grades, and don't remember how much I love you. These are two very separate things, okay? So the more that we can show them that we value them outside of their behavior, better their behavior is gonna get. So when we use that word and, we start to value them and start to separate that out for them. And it also, what else it shows them is that people make mistakes and their inherent worth goes nowhere, right? So it starts to break away that perfectionism that we see so often happening. Okay, so avoiding shame and blame and listening goes all together. So I want to talk about the difference between the judge and the investigator. This is another analogy that I really love and makes a really big difference for when I'm working with parents and teens at the same time. A lot of the times as parents, because we've already been there, we come in knowing that what we have to say is right, knowing what we saw. This is what we saw, this is what happened. And our kid is like, you're not listening to me. And so what ends up happening in these lecturing type conversations or conversations where kids shut down is because the judge is coming out. Not that you are judging them, but just think about a judge in like a very logical way, right? Is that, this is what I said, this is what I saw, and I don't want to hear it. The investigator comes from a place of curiosity. So when kid comes and they got, a C on a test, and that's, not something that you would expect of them, going in with, hey, tell me about that. I got a notification on whatever that you got a C. Tell me a little bit about that. And they might say something, or they might not say anything. And part of being curious is asking open-ended questions without assuming that you know all the answers first. Because as parents, we like to assume that we know everything, but we can never know everything, right? So allowing space for that curiosity gives them room and safety to be able to be more truthful upfront with you. So if we're talking about, like right now, I'm trying to teach honesty to my kid, and it can be very easy to be, to have shame be a part of it. Like, well, I know that you did that, right? That is where we're throwing shame in, and that's where the judge comes in versus, okay, so you're telling me this, tell me more about that, or help me to understand a little bit more what you just said, or I don't think that we're on the same page. Can you let me a little bit more in on that story? And you're just asking them, you're not asking them specifics. You're just saying, help me to better understand what happened here. And then thank you for being honest with me about that. Right? So when we go in hot, assuming that we know everything versus when we say, bring me more in on what happened, we're going to get very different answers. And that is what happens in the parent-child relationship when you go from power struggles to collaboration. When they feel like you are taking the time to hear their side of things, rather than just assume that you already know the answers and that you don't want to get into it, those are going to have very different fruits. Interact with them intentionally once a day with no technology. Phones are put away, alerts are off. Maybe it's, not that you're sitting down watching TV next to each other because that's still media, but you decide to want to walk with each other. You went out to go get a cone of ice cream, or you decided to just like, hey, I've got to pay some bills over here. I would love to chat with you. Tell me about what happened, in drama today, or whatever that might be. So this intentionality, studies show that 20 intentional minutes a day with your kid is enough to achieve a secure attachment. So if you have 20 intentional minutes with your kid with no distractions, that is enough time over time with that consistency. That can be enough time to help your kid feel like you're seeing them and not just their behaviors. be proactive about your family decisions around screens. And then, this goes along with intentionally. The talk about what you're doing on your phone when you're on it. Sometimes, right, it goes a little bit against what I just said about like, well, your mom, like the kids, like, I don't freaking care if you're emailing, you're on your phone too. But sometimes like I'll pull up a recipe on my phone when I'm with my kids and I'll pull Kel over, Kel, will you help me find this recipe on the phone? I really need you to help me be my sous chef. And so when he knows kind of why I'm doing it, that takes away a little bit of the mystery of like, what has them in like totally, hypnotized by this thing. So it works in a lot of situations. It doesn't work in some situations, but when we are a little bit more forthcoming about what we are doing when we are with them, then, and it happens, it's more likely to work if it's happening less often, right? If you're spending intentional time with them without your phone on, it's not going to matter as much. But if your phone is always on, they are going to bug you about it a lot too. So again, you are modeling what you want to see. Okay, so the point, the pinnacle of where we've headed. So you've decided what your family rules are with your partner ahead of time. You've talked about the specifics of what that's going to look like. You've decided whether your kid is digital ready and whether that's going to happen. You've decided that you've taken maybe a little bit of a reflection on your own behavior and you're like, oh, I'm not super great at this either because we're not perfect. So we've gotten to this point where the kid is going to have get their new phone, or you've reined it out. It's just gotten so far out of hand and you're like, no consequence. I don't even, what are consequences? My kid is just running the show here, right? So what I like to call the collaborative meeting is going to make you think that you give the kid so much power, but what is really happening is you are setting the limits. You're going to already put the cones on the side and you're going to let them make the little decisions in the middle, but you still have the power because you're setting the game and they get to help make decisions. But when the kid is heard and they feel valued, you've got their buy-in. But if you're telling them what to do and you're saying, this is how it's going to be, when you don't get that buy-in, it's so much harder to expect that they are going to follow through, right? So this is just the key to your relationship with your teen, especially because it seems like some of you have middle school age. So you are just getting there, right? You're springboarding into the teenage years. I cannot express enough how much I wish every teen that I see I was able to sit down with. Some parents are really interactive and we do it all as a whole family thing. But there are some times where I'm just like, oh, if I could just get in front of that parent and just tell them how much their kid just wants to just like, they want their parent to know how hard they're trying to make them happy and that they are doing the very best that they can and they just want to be seen. That I think every parent would be like, that is what I want too, right? So we just sometimes see that in such different ways. But when we take away the judge and become that curious investigator, that is when collaboration is really going to happen. So asking a lot of those open-ended questions in general. But we're going to talk about this in the way of, this is going to be a whole family project that we are doing together. This is how you can rein it in when you have gone too far, is because you're going to put yourself on the line too. And you're going to say, I've gotten out of control with my Instagram usage. So I really need this. Will you help me? Can you be my touch point with this? And you are going to take it on as you are the problem a little bit. Not that you're the problem, but that your whole family, this is the whole family project. We're going to partner together in this. Maybe if you have a trickier kid, it can be more of that, like, hey, I really need you to keep me accountable here because I am noticing that I'm spending so much time on my phone and it is taking away so many opportunities and it is not making me happy and I'm not going outside as much as I used to, and go on and on and on. So can you really help me with this? Because I trust you to keep me accountable here. So you can do it in a couple of different ways. Again, acknowledging that this is tough for you too, immediately lowers that defense with your team. When you say, I'm in this with you versus I'm above you, and they see it as a pointing, a blaming, and a shaming game. So a lot of the times parents are like, well, I don't want to be my kid's friend. And that's not what I'm saying. This is about saying, we're all imperfect. And as a family, this is something that's important to us. And so we're going to support each other in doing this. There is already and will always be a natural hierarchy in the family because you are the parent and they are the kid, and that is just the reality of it. So by you coming down to their level, in air quotes, by saying like, this is so hard for me. I know I'm not perfect at this. Maybe perfect's not the right word because that's not what we're striving for either, but I know I'm not great at this. It makes them feel like they're in it with you instead of that they are always the problem, which is not what you're intentionally doing. But I think teens feel that way a lot of the time from a lot of different things. Then we're going to build very clear, matter-of-fact boundaries. So you will discuss together. These are the rules that Dad and I, or Mom and I, have come up with. We've talked to you about these before. Maybe we haven't. We're going to talk a little bit about cyberbullying and a little bit of these things, and we'd love your input on it. But this family meeting is about, I really want your input because your voice matters so much and you're smart. I know that you have input to put here. When it becomes a family meeting versus a sit down on the other side of the table and let me talk to you about, how poorly you did with this, it's going to create a very different culture within your home. And it goes from saying, honey, you can come to me with everything. And then they come to you and you being like, what are you thinking? To them never, and then that leads to them not wanting to come to you again because they're like, well, they mean that. It comes to, you can come to me with anything, honey. And they come to you with a mistake and you're like, all right, that happened. Tell me a little bit about why that happened, or how can I support you in this right now, right? You're going to get around to all the parenting stuff, but the biggest parenting that you can do, again, is to level with them and see them. Just see them in the pain that they're coming to you with. So when you are able to sit down together and say, we want your input on what would be valuable. If you could give me any rule, what would it be around my phone? If you give me any rule, what would it be? And this is not you saying these are the rules, you're just throwing it out there. We want your input. So you're going to set the outer limits and you're going to say, we're going to know your passwords. We're going to check in from time to time. If you want to buy something, we expect you to talk to us about it. All this is going to go in a phone contract. All of those things are rules. But within the limits, you can say, okay, we're going to set the limits that we're going to plug our phone in at night. What time do you think that might be appropriate? What time do you think is the best time to plug in the phone that you're going to get ample enough sleep and that you also feel like you were able to kind of chat with your friends enough? And they're going to give you some input and you're like, okay, that's really interesting. What do you think about that? You will end up making the final decision on this, but by talking with them about it, you are going to be surprised at the smart decisions that they too want to make. Because again, when we bring them in on it, they're going to be more likely to do it. So they're going to do things that they want. So they're going to say, you might have a kid that says 1 a.m. and you're like, nice try again, and keeping it light is a great way to do it. What time do you actually think might be a good time? I like to go to bed. I like to make sure that I'm in bed by, 10 p.m. So I don't know, maybe that gives me, 30 minutes without my phone to like get my breath. What do you think? What do you think about that? So it's this constant, I want to hear from you. What do you think about that? And it's this back and forth, collaborative, curious conversation instead of, I expect you to do this, period, right? Because you're still in control. You are already setting the limits and boundaries. You're just helping them fill in the gaps a little bit. And that illusion of autonomy, which it is autonomy, but it's also a little bit of illusion of control because you still are holding the reins, is enough for them. Because they feel like they have a seat at the table, not only a seat, but they have a voice at the table and it's being heard. That is a huge difference. There's a difference here between being judged and punished, right? Or between being judged and punished over feeling supported. So that goes back to the shame, blame, and to the help me understand what was going on there, right? So these are some additional, we talked about a little bit of these, but here are some additional, we talked about some overall rules, but here are some ideas that I think are really interesting. No phone zones, okay? You have all seen the family that is out at dinner, and maybe we are the family that is out at dinner and everybody is on a device.
And you're like, wasn't this like historically a really great family time? Family dinners, weren't those a thing? And now everybody's sitting there, nobody's interacting, right? That goes to sit at the table, but don't have a voice, right? It's a very different vibe. So you have a basket. Okay, everyone put your phones. Okay, it's family dinner. Okay, the basket goes over here and I sit down. Maybe you have conversation cards if you have a hard time getting people to talk, or you don't know, you cannot ask again, how was your day? Because you're like, I cannot keep doing this. It can be really fun to have conversation cards or have almost like date night sticks, conversation sticks, and the youngest, okay, we're going youngest to oldest tonight. Youngest, you pull the stick out first, and they look at it and they get to choose whoever they want to answer this question, right? So family dinner does not just have to be this miserable thing where mom's not letting me have my phone, but this is those 20 minutes that we are just going to go at it together, right? So there are lots of ways to make no phone zones great. I think family fun is another one, right? Tonight's family night, we're gonna go out for an hour, we're going bowling, or we're gonna go to Topgolf or whatever. That's another great time to have a no phone zone. I think car rides is very interesting because I hear a lot with my teens as well when they get in the car that they don't necessarily want to talk to their parent, but if their parent is distracted, it's even worse, you know? And so sometimes car rides can be a great opportunity to connect. And my husband says that him and his dad always brought up the worst topics in the car. Like that's where he talked to him about the birds and the bees and all things because he was locked in and he couldn't leave. And so it was just this brilliant way to do it. And if you have a collaborative conversation and a collaborative relationship with them, your kids are going to really start valuing those car ride times because it is going to be the time that is, I get undistracted mom for 15 minutes in the carpool line, right?
Can I share a strategy?
Yes,
my own home. So with the dinner time, when we're really struggling with it's silence, we don't have phones at the table, but I have a teenager, 13, still silence. We have a thing that's called high, low, buffalo, or chicken.
Cute.
And so it's assigned to, you know, what was the high point of your day? What was the really low point? Buffalo is something that was surprising, and the chicken was what was something boring. And she has just really, we've done this now for over 5 years, and maybe because it started when she was younger, now it's kind of a tradition and she enjoys it, but it's just fun and silly way to engage. And then and even with middle schoolers and high schoolers, they still enjoy the game and the play. And so making light of it that way.
I thank you so much for saying that, Whitney. Kids thrive on structure. And so these rituals and routines are so important because it's something that they can count on, and that consistency is so huge for them. Especially the older they get, the more chaotic their schedule gets, and to have that consistency. I'm gonna be talking about my rose and thorn tonight with mom and dad at the dinner table, right?
Same concept.
Yeah, same concept. Beautiful. Another tip for car rides also is don't ask your kid how their day was. It's just not, you're gonna get good or bad. So we want to maybe say, what was the most boring teacher that you had today? Right? Something to throw them off a little bit, or insert some surprise question. And every day, like I read this thing that was like, instead of asking your kid, like a toddler, what did they do at school? Because usually my 5-year-old is pretty like, I did this and that, but recently he's been like, I don't remember or whatever. He's just like going into whatever new phrase he learned on the playground. I started saying, okay, we're going to play a game. It's a yes or no game. I'm going to guess what you did at school today. And I'm going to see if I'm reading your mind. Okay. And so let me see. Did you play with paint and art today? No, I didn't have art today. You didn't have art today. So you can reframe it in different ways that you're basically going to the same point of what'd you do today, but you are just talking about a chicken instead of what happened again on day A. Right? So the more creative you can get, again, these are the types of things with parenthood where it is not hard. You just have to intentionally do it and decide ahead of time what you're going to do before you're in the moment. Right? So before you get in a hot moment with your kid, because you know it's going to happen that next time that you get their semi-report card, that you're going to say, before I talk to my kid about the report card, I'm going to do A, B, and C to self-regulate so that we can have a collaborative conversation about this. Right? This predetermination of I'm going to do this before I get in the spot, in that crunch spot, so much more successful doing it. So I really encourage you to think about those types of things of like, you can go on Pinterest and say like a list of open-ended kids to ask my teenager and screenshot it and put it as the background on your phone for a week, and you'll memorize the questions. And every time you look at it, you're like, right, I'm supposed to be, or I'm going to ask them this question when they hop in the car or whatever. So there's so many creative ways that you can do it. Again, it's not hard, but you have to be intentional about doing it, right?
Can I also add too?
Yeah, please.
For the no phone zone, for our family, bedrooms, we know while we sleep, our phones aren't in there.
Mhm.
And developmentally at this time, 10 to 12 hours of sleep is what our kids need. And I'm finding, at least for my daughter's friends, you know, they're still texting or snapping her at 1 a.m. and I'm thinking, what are you doing? So for us, it's really important to keep the phones out of the bedroom. We make sure that she's off the phone and off a screen an hour before going to bed so that her brain can calm down and reset and get invited into that space of rest. And you know, there's a lot out there that's talking about the effects of the phone screen, the blue screen, and how that just keeps the brain awake. And so when you're in your bed at night and you're looking at that screen, you're also not allowing yourself space to decompress. So there's research and purpose of maybe making the bedroom space a no phone space too.
Absolutely. Yeah, that goes to this phone charging station. It's in the hallway or it's in the kitchen or it's somewhere out of our bedrooms. I love what you said, Whitney, about this goes back to kind of talking about when you're having this collaborative conversation with, we're switching it up as a family. Let's talk about the rules and expectations we want to hold each other accountable to. You can give research and knowledge. Okay, so research tells us that you need to be off of that when you are, you know, on your phone or watching TV or scrolling whatever with a screen before bed, that it makes it X times amount harder to sleep or whatever it is. So then you've given out the research again, you've set the limit. It takes 60 minutes or it makes this happen. What do you think would be the best time? So by giving them extra information, they're like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense. Okay, right? So I love that the research and knowledge is not something that just you need to understand, but it could be a great tool for your kid to also know why they're doing it. Because so many times they're like, well, why? This person gets to do it, right? And that is, every family has different rules, is just your response. Every family has different rules. Yep, as there's so much diversity in the world, isn't that great? So when you are making these limits and these boundaries and these expectations together, it's great for you to throw out some research there. It's great for you to throw out like, oh my gosh, I saw this thing the other day and this is what I was telling you. What do you think about that? Because so many times the kid wants to know why you are asking them to do something because it makes no sense in their brain. Well, Molly gets to sleep with her phone and she comes to school and she looks rested every day, mom, right? So sometimes them understanding the why behind things is another opportunity for you to connect and collaborate. If you see X comes to me, that it goes back to that phone safety, right? Those safe, wise boundaries. My expectation is that, you know, when you see cyberbullying, you come to me. I want to chat with you about that. Or I love the opportunity to chat with you about that. Or maybe it's something more serious, like, you know, if you see, if somebody's asking you for nude pictures, I would like you to come to me and we can chat about that. And it's your job to show up with no judgment in those moments, right? And say, you came to me, I will listen to you. Mm-hmm. So, this is an opportunity that you can talk to your kids about too. What do you think you might have questions to? What are you kind of afraid might pop up that you're like, Mom, I want you to really be around when I have this particular question, right? And then encouraging an offline online time balance. Another expectation and rule that you can have at this collaborative meeting. So we're going to talk about where we're going to put all of these, but so your responsibility as a parent. So we've got child responsibility, we have parent responsibility, or this is just family responsibility in general. But I would encourage you that there will be times where you have to be the parent with the phone and not just like
we're all, doing this together. There are times where you're going to have to say, I expect you to come to me when you see this. So that means that you're making yourself available, that if you are deciding on this as a family, that you are going to come to me when you see X, then I am going to stop what I'm doing and we are going to sit down and talk about it. Or I'm going to say, I so appreciate that you came and talked to me about that. I'm in the middle of a conference call, but can we wrap around in 30 minutes? I'm going to come to your room. And you're setting a specific time to wrap back around with that. So you're making yourself available. I'm not really a fan of giving one warning before a consequence if everybody knows the expectation ahead of time. But I think that there is some wisdom here with the phone because it is such a lifeline that they want to keep it. So I think that there could be some value in gently reminding them, like, hey, I see you teetering on our family rule about this. I'm gonna raise the white flag so that you know that I have my eye on this. And if I see it again, then the consequence that we decided is going to be put into place. And this is always going back to the contracts that you guys are going to make at the family collaboration meeting, where you remind them, you are not the bad guy for taking the phone away. It's like, turn it, try again next time, right? Because when we are able to collaborate, that's when, and they have that buy-in because they got to make the rules, they also learn responsibility for the consequence, right? That not, my mom and dad are the worst, they just take it every chance they can. It's, I lost that phone, or I had whatever, I had to pull weeds for 2 hours because I didn't do what I committed to do, right? And then of course, following through, you can talk and talk and talk about this family phone contract. You're sitting down and talking about it, you're making your rules, you write them all down. You can talk the talk, but if you don't follow through with it, that's when you can't rein back in the family, right? Is because I had somebody sitting in my on my chair today right before I came here, and they're like, yeah, my mom never gives me consequences, it's great. And I'm like, would you like consequences? And he's like, yeah, I mean, I could see how they would be like beneficial, but like I never get them. So you know what I mean? And so you're like, okay. And I've talked with this parent, and she has said, like, it has gotten so far out of control, I don't even know what to do. And I'm like, well, let's start with a consequence. You know what I mean? You have to follow through, or all of this is moot. None of this matters if you don't follow through. So that means that you have to follow through with yourself too. Right? If you're saying this is a family thing that we're going to do, you keep me accountable, I keep you accountable, then when they say, hey mom, you've already hit your max time for the phone, then you say, hey, you sort of keep me accountable. I'm gonna wrap up what I'm doing. Set a timer for me, 2 minutes, I'm gonna do it in 2 minutes flat, and whatever. You make a thing of it and add some humor to it, or thank them for being on it, and then you do it. Because if you don't do it, they're not going to do it. And if you don't follow through with the consequence of the contract, then they're like, I can get away with whatever I want, right? And then what happens is a volcano happens, and it's a whole falling out, and that's going to happen anyways in all of our families, but your follow through is imperative when it comes to your child's behavior and your relationship with them as well. So here's what this family phone contract will look like. You're sitting down, you're saying, we've got this, it's laid out, you can just have a blank sheet of printer paper. And you're going to say, this is a contract between mom and dad and Sean and Julie and Catherine. And these are our family rules and expectations around cell phones, medias, screens, whatever you want it to be. This is the responsibilities and expectations for the kid. This is the responsibilities, and the consequences associated with them. Have the kids be a part of what the consequences are. That's part of the collaboration. Okay, so honey, if you don't do it, here are a couple of the options that we thought of some consequences. Do you have any that you'd like to add, or which one do you think is the most appropriate? And they'll be like, maybe this one. They're not gonna like any of them, but by you, again, you set the limit and they got to choose the little part. So you're okay with any of the consequences, and you say, you choose the consequence. And then when they don't do it, you're like, oh, that was that consequence that you chose, right? Darn it, you're gonna have to try again tomorrow, or whatever it is, right? So them being a part of the consequence assignment is just as important as them being a part of what the rules themselves are, because you want the full buy-in. Parent responsibilities, and then everyone signs it and dates it, and you slap it with a piece of tape up on your refrigerator or on your front door, your garage door, wherever you see all the time, pantry door.
this could also look like parent, child expectations, parent responsibilities. I think that it's wise to separate them, but it's okay for there to be like the same thing on a lot of the lines, instead of it just being like everyone's responsibilities, because you may have a little bit more and they may have something that's a little bit different, but for the most part, the amount of time that you spend on it, or where you do it, or how you do it, should all really be the same, because again, this is a family partnership, right? I mean, it is for real, but like a little bit of that too. So just a couple of things. It's so hard to do it because you're like, it is an illusion of control because you are setting the limits, but you are giving them control, right? And that's why they will follow through with it more likely, is because they were at that meeting where they signed their name and they came up with the consequence that they lose their phone for 24 hours if X happens, right? So water the flowers. That is just the best tip that I could ever give a parent is, and for myself, is like, you want to come in on the moments when it's the worst because you want to put water on the fire. But if we are reinforcing the good that's happening, we're less likely to get as big of a fire, right? So the more that we can water and give reinforcement to what we want to see, the more we're going to see that behavior. You're still going to have bad behaviors because that is just what their job is, and that is figuring out how to be a human being on our life, just like we are still making mistakes. And you will have to address the hard things, right? But you're going to do that as curiosity rather than with assumptions, right? So when it comes to the hard things, coming at it with curiosity, and when it comes to the good things, pointing out every single thing you see, every single thing. And sometimes I'll have parents that'll be like, well, I don't see my kid doing anything good sometimes. And I'm like, well, sometimes it is just, you stayed in the car with me. Thank you for staying in the car with me. Or sometimes, like for my toddler, I'm like, as silly as like, I see that you're taking deep breaths. Or like you're breathing, and your breathing is just so awesome right now. Like this is totally, they don't, whatever, but it regulates you, it connects you on something good, right? So you just threw a big old tantrum and you're like, I have literally nothing good to say about you, but you can find something very small that is still significant enough.
Yeah. And another really powerful approach is 5-to-1 ratio. So if you're having to give a correction to restore that reconnected relationship that doesn't just settle on that correction, following up with the small, tiny 5 positive things that you can recognize helps reestablish a positive connection and gets them ready for the next time you need to correct them. So they're hearing more and growing more of the positive than the one negative.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for saying that. That 5-to-1 is such a great ratio. So that's 5 positive things to 1 correction or negative thing. And that can look like, I would end with a good positive, but you can sandwich them, or you can, figure out the way that works best for your family, but it can look a lot of different ways. But that's such a great tip to remember, that when you correct, because you will correct, that is the job of a parent. Hopefully we will do so lovingly, and we will make mistakes, but it also is continually followed up. So for instance, I get grades all the time. So you got a bad grade. Okay, I saw that you've been working harder in this class, and I know that you've been communicating with the teacher a lot more, and this still needs to be improved. And I expect you to hit blank by this time, or whatever the correction is. And I am so happy to support you in whatever that looks like, because I am totally Team Jane, right? So I love this idea of making sure that even when you're correcting, is coming from a place of, I'm also going to tell you why I think you're awesome, and also why my love is not going to fluctuate because of your behavior. Again, we want to separate out the behavior from the worth and love of that kid. Rethink your messaging, right? We're going back to, this is not a moral thing. The phone is not good or bad. The brownie is not good or bad, right? It's just a thing, and how we use it is how it affects our life. So when we rethink this messaging as coming from a more neutral place, instead of bad things that are riding your brain out, blah, 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 it's just not going to be, here's what he's saying. there's no wrong way to parent. Okay, well, that's also a bad way to say it. There's no one right way to parent, but how you parent is going to get back a particular type of feedback. And the feedback, if you keep doing the same thing and you keep getting the same feedback from your kid, it is not working. So try something different, right? So there are so many different ways that you can do it, but by engaging with them in this kind of way, you are probably going to get the behavior that you are trying to have and that you're trying to accomplish or to see. Collaborate or explicitly teach. Again, kids do not come knowing how to regulate themselves. They don't know what a deep breath does. They don't know that walking outside can be helpful. They don't know that they don't know. All they know is that they get angry and they want to hit somebody, right? So we have to explicitly teach them how to do things. We can't just say be responsible because we've never, I don't know, responsible is such a, what does it mean? I know what it is like kind of about, but if we don't talk with them specifically about what we want to see, then we're going to have a lot more power struggle. So that explicit discussion together is so important. Model what you want to see. Remember, they're soaking in everything, which also means give yourself a little bit of grace because we're not all going to do it perfectly. But coming from this place of, when you talk to me, I'm going to put down my phone, or I'm going to say, I've got something, I'm so glad you're coming to me. I have got one more minute and I am all ears and eyes on you. They just want to be seen and heard as an individual, not as a grumpy teen, as a rebellious teen, as someone who's addicted to their phone, who needs another lecture because they're just not getting it. They want to just be seen by you, and they're going to get that however they can. And by you regulating yourself and coming in a gentle, curious way, they're going to calm down too, because they are learning to regulate as you regulate, right? They're going to mirror that. I have just a few books that I love that I wanted to I always love book recommendations. My very favorite parenting book is The Power of Showing Up. I love it so much. You've all heard of Daniel Siegel, I'm sure, The Whole Brain Child, No Drama Discipline, all of these things. This is my favorite that he does because I think that it is just the best of all of it, and you have 4 very doable takeaways. And the also thing that I love about it is at the end of every chapter, he and I think it's Tina, they're asking you questions about what it was like for you as a kid to be in that position, and it almost allows you to heal your inner child a little bit as you're going, so you recognize what's happening. So I love that one. Reset Your Child's Brain is more of the technology conversations. It says here in a blurry way, a 4-week system to reset your, family media use or whatever. So if it's out of control, this is a great thing. This is my very, very favorite one. There's one that's like specifically to little, I can say all of them are my very favorite ones, but there's one that's specifically for little kids and some are for teens, but this is a really, really great one about that I think is just fabulous for parents who are in the preteen teen world. Gives you such great doable feedback. And How to Raise an Adult, I just can't tell you how important of a book it is. I cannot tell you how important of a book it is. You got to read all of them, but none of us have enough time. So pick which one, read, the back of them and see which one feels like it fits the best. But I love them all for so many different reasons. This one's a great one also for teens where you feel like their grades are so important, and that the only way they're ever going to be successful is if you kind of do everything for them because they're not good enough at it yet or whatever. So this is about we're not raising kids, we're raising adults. We're raising human beings who are going to be a part of society, and we need to raise them in a way to where they actually need us less, not more. And sometimes that means that I'm sad when my 5-year-old can now make his own sandwich because I'm like, you don't need me anymore. But I'm like, no, I want you to learn how to make your own freaking sandwich. You know what I mean? Because you need to learn how to do that for your life. So all of them are so great for so many different reasons. If you've never read a parenting book or like, I want to go back to the beginning, The Power of Showing Up is phenomenal. But just some to continue the conversations. But anyways, what questions do you have, if any? That's a lot of content.
Yes, that was. And I'll see what comes through on our feed here.
Or even just thoughts you had about any of it. What sounded dumb or what sounded like, oh, That might be, a good little tip.
There's a couple of other books that are really, really good. I forget the author's name, but one is for teens and
Mhm.
preteens, and it's Dial Down the Drama.
Love it.
And then as they get to be 17, 18, and about to go to college, it's called Dial Up the Dream.
Whoa, I haven't heard of that one. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
That's the one you gave me.
Yeah.
Well, my daughter saw it and she was like, do you need that book?
Am I drama?
Yet.
Oh. Another practical strategy that we use in our house is free screen Sundays.
Mm.
And we're not super consistent about this, but when we do it, it's kind of a great way to teach consequence awareness. Because then my daughter's like, all right, I'm going to catch dad on his phone. Just watch. Like, so we really try to make a conscious effort, at least for like 4 hours, if not like full Sunday, if we could make it through. Anyone caught on a screen, like has some kind of like agreed consequence. So it's like maybe doing dishes for the week or laundry. And maybe this is my child, but she's 13 and she loves things like this, that structure. She responded well. She was really working hard to try and trick herself away from thinking about the phone and making herself busy in other ways. So all of a sudden she's picked up and started doing more art again at home, going out and being with friends and playing in the neighborhood. Hopefully not on their phones. I don't know. They're out in the neighborhood at that point. But but I felt like that's been a positive addition to our home in practicing family set consequences. And
I love that. I think that there's, again, when the kid's apart, when the parent's going to get the consequence, they are going to be so perfect because they want, like they're going to be in the lines of that boundary because they want so bad to give you the consequence. And so that's why doing it as a partnership, if this is a whole family situation, is so successful because the kids are just, they are just waiting to catch mom and dad, right? So it makes it more exciting. I think that there's a huge benefit to adding humor into things too, of that, like, okay, you caught me out of, set a 1 minute timer. And if I don't do it by 1 minute, then you get to, I don't know, throw water on me, or I don't know, I can't think of anything cool, but, instead of being like, oh my gosh, okay, I got it. You can, again, it's not hard. You just have to be intentional about those like moments of communication and deciding ahead of time. This is my back pocket saying for that one, and practicing it when everything is calm before it gets to high stakes. What else works for your family? Yeah.
This one's like kind of a little bit of a different topic,
Sure.
but with social media specifically, especially like all the messaging we're getting right now, especially if you have a daughter, is that it's just not really producing any positive results at a younger age. And so I was curious what you're seeing in your practice as far as, patients you've had who like either regret having had social media at too young of an age, or I know every kid's different. It's like you're looking for whether they can handle it or not, but in your experience, what you've seen as far as age that social media should enter the realm.
It's so, you just want to say never, which is why we're doing this, because that's what we really actually want. I have some clients who are really self-reflective and they're like, I've taken that one off because I just noticed that it made me, like some of my more suicidal clients, or some, women who were 15 or 16-year-old girls who were cutting themselves. Sometimes they saw it first on social media. And so they're like, oh, that's an option. Great. Right. So the exposure again is such a thing. I think people know what the consequence is, but they're still not getting off of it. So I don't think there's a lack of awareness for girls, because most girls are like, I don't usually feel good after, or I make sure I only follow this, that, or that because I can feel this way. So I think number one, I'm not sure about an age. I think it's less about an age and more about the conversations that you're having about it, of, sometimes like when I follow this person, I used to follow this person and I just found myself feeling like not good about myself. And every time I would see a picture of her, I would just think that I wasn't good enough. And I just saw that that was this could be a completely made up story. Okay. But I just saw that that was taking a really big toll on me. And I just wasn't having very kind thoughts about myself. And so I just decided that I was going to unfollow that person. So you can have these types of conversations where your real scenario is a made up scenario in your head, but probably we've all actually experienced. To have with them. And so sometimes when I like to use that strategy when kids aren't saying something, but something's going on. So like when I have a client sometimes that they, won't admit to something, but I know about it from their parents or whatever. I don't ever tell them, well, your parent told me. I'll just say, one time I had this neighbor and make up some sort of something and how that made me feel as being a part of it. I'll just say, have you ever had that feeling before? What would you tell me about that? Like, what advice would you give me about that? So you can kind of, again, disguise this in a way of, I trust your input and I'm going to ask you a question of, I really struggled when I saw that. Like, what would you do if you ever got in that position? As far as an age go, I know that like most like people now are saying like at least 14. Like 14.
It does seem young.
I know, but then you have the sixth grader who has an Apple Watch and access to all the things, and you're just like, how did we even get here? So 14 is what they say that way. But we are handing them this tool at the time when their brain is the most vulnerable and the most chaotic. And so that's why it's so important to be having these conversations, but establishing these types of conversations before you give them more access is such a big part of it. And that goes again to when you find that they are, if you get on and you're like, well, all you follow are the Kardashians or whatever, right? Then that's the conversation of, bring me in on that. What do you get from following them? What do you, what might be a little bit hard about that? Or what have you noticed you feel when you see this picture? And so again, I think what happens with social media is it's just kind of, it's its own thing, but it all goes back to what kind of relationship of communication and line of communication are we having with our kids, because they're going to run into things whether or not they have Instagram. So that you can, like, the other day I was just like, I just wanted to put a pillow, you want to put a pillow over your kid and you're like, I don't ever want harm to come to you, which is
Oh, I thought you were going to say you're going to want to smother them.
We've all been there. You never think that you'll ever hit a kid, and then you're like, I get why people spank. You're like, oh, I just get it. I get it. Anyways, but what I loved about How to Raise an Adult is it goes like, we all have that instinct to protect our kids from everything, and we do them such a fault by doing that, by saying, I'm just going to do everything for you because I don't want you to get hurt or have any sort of failure, instead of talking with them through the failure, talking with them through the mistake. So set those parental controls, set those, precedents and those expectations and rules and guidelines. And then it is your job to check in and follow up with what you're noticing, or how, I heard you maybe you heard them over saying something to themselves in the mirror to their friend or whatever. And again, you've got a made up story instantly that you're connecting with your kiddo on. So,
and it is okay to upset your children. It is okay to make them feel uncomfortable by putting these boundaries in there. And like, you're not doing anything in harm to setting your boundaries, even though they may sound like you're harming them. They're sounding that way because you're doing something that's healthy. And it's natural for them to fight back on that.
Yeah, it's like when somebody, I have a client who's cutting, the first part of the safety plan is get everything sharp out of the house or locked up in a cabinet that they don't know about or whatever, right? And so you, in your like adult brain, is like, well, yeah, like that's a really important, healthy boundary. And your kid may not see it at the time, right? Like, you're taking this away from me. It's the only thing that helps or whatever, which I don't. So all of this is not to say be a passive parent by any means. This is about you setting limits and boundaries and being explicit about them up front so you can follow through and have a conversation with them about it. Your follow through is It's just so important. Yes.
This all sounds great. The problem is kind of with the setting of the boundaries and setting the rules is when you don't really know what rules to set. Because you don't know what's out there until it comes to you and you find out that, you know,
Sure.
you're seeing this and you as an adult know right from wrong and expect them to. And so is there a resource, because, you know, we didn't grow up with what's out there like this. Is there a resource that we can provide to the kids to say, if you see any of this stuff? Because, you know, honestly, I don't know what I would say, you know, that one part where you said, if you see this, I mean, I would put blatant things there and say, if you see nude pics, but there are other things, like you said, grooming and such. So is there a resource for the kids and frankly for myself?
Yeah, I can speak to a little bit about that.
Yeah.
We, you know, recently had Detective Newsom come and he was very explicit and direct about what you're experiencing and encountering and what you need to look out for, and to what level is it of your responsibility to not act and not get into those things. And you know, today's talk has focused on a different realm of this, and if this is something that we want to invite Newsom back for a parent talk to give us more of a direct look at what's out there, what do we need to be aware of, how are kids using this. Like, we can do that.
Well, that's great. I was just wondering exactly how they would know that this is wrong.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
and this is also another interesting topic. I'm sorry. I'm like, I can't help
Please
myself.
take the bite.
What was I gonna say? Oh, we have a sense of morality. We have a solid sense of what's right and wrong, and so do our kids. But then when we get into social platforms, they're after the likes. They're after the affirmation of the like. And even though if you take that situation and put it in real world, they're like, yeah, that's wrong. I would never do that. In the digital realm, because they're so driven by those likes, all of a sudden the morality is grayed and it's shifted because the dopamine, the intense, you know, connection and like reaction is driving that frontal, you know, decreased developed frontal lobe of us, our lizard brains are kicking in. We're graying things there. So we're losing our compass in those areas. And so then I think that is where this great parent structure and modeling is so important, because now you're modeling outside your family unit what good citizenship is supposed to be, even if you get into those spaces. And then hopefully we're a little, you know, a voice in their head that guides them. And there's I say, oh, the other thing that he said too, which I thought was amazing, is like on the internet, you think you have friends, they're not your friends. Friends are people that you interface with face to face, you rely on, you talk to, you do things with. People on the internet, they're not your friends. And the average age of a gamer is 35. And so the kids were like, what? Oh my God. Yeah. And so that was,
So you're like, oh, good. I hope my kids get that one.
So there were some real eye openers that the students were having in our talks, and perhaps it would be a great idea to bring him back for a different parent talk perspective before school's out.
One of the biggest forums for it's just disgusting, but one of the biggest forums for child trafficking and predators and all that is Roblox, which is huge with these kids.
Yeah.
And that's how, and these people are, I mean, the grooming is just all over the map.
And then the other element of digital citizenship is don't get out there to air your laundry, because predators are looking for those key words to find vulnerable people and then pose as friends to help lure them out of the house or to talk to them more about it, to set them up.
So they were told all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't have many resources like for the for that in particular of like, because I don't know all the things that are out on the internet. I keep myself very, I don't have a lot of things just for my own self-protection because of how I felt if I have had them. So I don't really know that much about what's out there beyond like, here's what grooming looks like. But I do think so much of it is gray, but talking, I think talking to your kid about if I don't know if something's right or wrong, and I just have like this like flip flop of my tummy, or I just feel like if my mom were to peek over my shoulder, you can set in certain things. Like if I was looking at this and my mom peeked over my shoulder, if I would be like, "Ugh," then maybe that's a little bit of an indicator to you, right? Not embarrassing of like, Mom, don't talk to me about that. It's embarrassing. But like, I would be like in way big trouble or like mortified, then that might be an indicator. Or so again, you may want to talk about your own experiences of sometimes I've seen some great things and I just haven't known, and I've thought about them, or I've talked to a couple of people that I really trust about it, or, and we hope that we're that for you, whatever. But I think that it's good to talk about like how your body reacts to things. So if you start to get like that twist in your stomach, or you start to feel like if somebody saw you doing it, it would feel, type A, B, or C, then that's probably not good. And you can always, and I would encourage you to add amendments to your contract. You have a pink sticky note on there for like, okay, when you see this, you're coming to see me, and so the more that you learn this world too, this contract doesn't have to be the only contract or the only version of the contract. You can say this isn't working, or this is working, or let's add this to it now that we know about it. So again, it's really keeping that open line of communication open, and the way that you keep it open is when you say, come and talk to me, you have to let them come and talk to you instead of saying, right? Which we all do. Like, this is just what we do. We're like, what do you mean we're doing that? So that self-regulation piece is so huge in that open line of communication, because you've got to regulate yourself enough to say, my kid is actually coming to me. I want them to keep coming to me. So I've got to reinforce that by not being the cool mom, but by playing it cool. Like, lower your shoulders, breathe in, notice that this is a really good thing that they're coming to you, right? They call you drunk or something. They're calling you, they're coming to you. That's such a beautiful thing. So allow that line of communication to be open, and then reinforce it by following up on it and doing it well. And if you don't do it well, it's not too late. The best thing that we can do for our children is model an apology and a do-over. I didn't mean to say that. That came out. I didn't mean to say that. Let me take a deep breath. Okay, I really want to try that again. Can we have a do-over? You're modeling for them that everyone makes mistakes, and this is how you recover from them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay for us not to know every single tiny little thing that's out there, because no matter how much we know, there's always more that we don't know. It's the iceberg, right? It's just lurking under the surface, and we don't know all of it. And so if you can keep that open, you're going to know about it more, and then you can start to make those amendments to the Constitution.
Great, thank you. Well, we're about 8:20, so I think we are
Ah!
well into our time.
You guys,
Thank you, everyone, for
Sorry.
coming and participating. And if you have any
So much for setting this up.